I'm Charlie Peters here for a special edition as we are awaiting the meeting of Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Donald Trump.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Well, should we expect more of those fireworks this evening as Zelenskyy arrives at Mar-a-Lago to meet with President Donald Trump? Now, the meeting comes as Zelenskyy has thanked Sir Keir Starmer and the UK for constant cooperation and support. But it comes also as President Trump has hailed a very productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin of Russia, a call that lasted, according to Moscow, well over an hour. So is peace slowly slipping away? And at 6 o'clock here in the United Kingdom and 1 p.m. in Florida, this is the live shot from Mar-a-Lago as we await President Trump to welcome President Zelenskyy for this historic meeting. Well, for the next hour, we'll have all the latest from Florida, but of course, we'll be joined by commentators here in the studio and around the world reacting to that meeting. But before we await that historic meeting, let's go across now to Lewis Mackenzie for the latest news headlines.
Charlie, thank you very much. Good evening. It's just after 6 o'clock. Here are your latest GB News headlines. As you've just been hearing, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is set to meet Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida in the next few moments. The two leaders are expected to discuss the 20-point peace plan and the unresolved question of the future of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Vladimir Putin has demanded Ukraine hand over territory in the northern part of the Donetsk Oblast. That his forces are yet to capture, or at least unable to capture. Zelenskyy has confirmed he has spoken to Sir Keir Starmer this afternoon. In a post on X, the Ukrainian president thanked the Prime Minister for his constant coordination. A Downing Street spokesperson has said the Prime Minister spoke with Zelenskyy today. Both leaders welcomed ongoing diplomatic efforts and commended President Trump's continued engagement in securing peace. The Prime Minister and President Zelenskyy agreed to remain in close contact in the coming days. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has been criticised for the welcoming of the arrival of British-Egyptian activist Alaa Abdel Fattah to the UK after his historical social media messages have emerged showing the campaigner allegedly calling for Zionists to be killed. The Prime Minister said he was delighted that Abdel Fattah had arrived from Egypt on Friday evening after a travel ban imposed by Cairo was lifted following lobbying by ministers. The activist with dual British-Egyptian citizenship previously said on social media that it was heroic to kill Zionists, including civilians. The posts have now been deleted. A Number 10 source rejected that welcoming Abdel Fattah's return was an endorsement of his political views. But Shadow Justice Minister Robert Jenrick told GB News the Prime Minister has shown poor judgment.
It is an absolute disgrace. It tells you everything you need to know about this Labour government. I think this man's citizenship should be revoked and he should be made to live in Egypt or, frankly, anywhere else in the world other than the UK.
The UK will impose visa restrictions against people arriving from the Democratic Republic of Congo after its government failed to agree to measures allowing the return of illegal migrants and foreign national offenders. Ministers say the DRC has not made changes required under the tightening of the UK's asylum rules announced in November. However, the Home Office say the African nations of Angola and Namibia have agreed to step up efforts to take back their citizens, having been threatened with sanctions alongside the DRC. Mahmoud added they won't hesitate to add extra countries to the visa ban list if they don't cooperate on illegal migrant returns. In other news, Nigel Farage has pledged to cancel the pensions of civil servants deemed responsible for allowing sex offender migrants into the country. The Reform UK leader made the vow in the wake of reports that Home Office officials have waved through claims regardless of the background of the applicants to whittle down the 150,000-strong asylum backlog. Under the plans, if Mr Farage becomes Prime Minister, any individual citizen any individual civil servant found responsible for allowing a foreign national into the country who then went on to rape or sexually assault a British citizen could be prosecuted and have their government pension forfeited, with the proceeds donated to victims' charities. The incoming Archbishop of Canterbury has been urged to scrap plans to spend £100 million over the Church of England's historical links to slavery. The Church's slavery links proposal was announced in January of 2023, following the publication of a report into the Church's historic links to the transatlantic slave trade. But now, in a letter seen by the Sunday Times, a group of Conservative MPs and peers are urging Dame Sarah Mullally to stop the Church from spending the money, claiming that the funds can only legally be spent on churches and payment of clergy wages. The largest volcano in Europe, Mount Etna, has erupted. Huge clouds can be seen rising from the mountain as Etna entered a new eruptive phase, with Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology confirming the volcanic activity. A yellow alert has been A yellow alert has been issued, with many concerned about nearby airports, with only some flights being delayed, but no serious disruptions so far. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. Now it's back to Charlie.
You can now watch GB News live across the United States of America and the world on Truth Plus. Scan the QR code to find out more, or visit gbnews.com/truth.
Welcome back to GB News. It's 6 minutes past 6 here in the United Kingdom, and it's just after 1 p.m. in Florida, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is preparing to meet with the US President Donald Trump, who is hosting the Ukrainian leader at his Mar-a-Lago home amid the closing in on those peace proposal plans, a 20-point plan now being put forward, and we could see a deal signed soon. Well, joining me more now for some reaction is journalist and author Dr. Azim Ibrahim. Dr. Ibrahim, thank you very much for joining us on GB News this evening. Some commentators and indeed world leaders have said that this deal is 90% there. How do you put your estimation for this?
Yeah, this is most welcome, Charlie. You know, the more discussion, the more dialogue we have with President Trump involved, the better it is, and the closer we'll come to the end of this very horrible war. President Trump is the only individual that can actually deliver peace in Ukraine. And as you mentioned, we're 90% there. There are a few outstanding obstacles. I suspect the number one priority Zelenskyy has is to get some sort of security guarantee from the United States. It won't be something like NATO Article 5, but he'll be pushing for something as close as possible. Everything else, you know, discussions over the Donbass region, nuclear power, rebuilding Ukraine, all of that is negotiable. He has to get some sort of security guarantee. I suspect he'll be pushing for an armed force of about 800,000 Ukrainian soldiers in peacetime, with financing from the European Union. He'd also be looking to try to get as much investment into Ukraine as possible from the United States to get them to make them stakeholders within Ukraine, to ensure that none of this is actually repeated in the near future with the Russian incursions into Ukrainian territory.
Now, Azim, this is the United States President's personal home down in Florida. I wonder what significance that could play, because we've seen the two leaders meet a few times this year in the White House in that feisty encounter involving the US Vice President J.D. Vance, but also that rather unexpected meeting at the funeral for the late Pope in the Vatican. This meeting at Donald Trump's personal home, not being in the White House, could that add a new dimension to this encounter?
Well, the president is on vacation at the moment. You know, he is actually on holiday in his Florida home. So I think this just emphasises the urgency which he puts on this situation. He's very keen on getting a deal done as quickly as possible. The United States has now got fatigue in terms of financing the war in Ukraine, providing weaponry. They just want to get it over and done with as quickly as possible and hopefully pass on much of the responsibility, particularly the financial aspect of it, to the Europeans, which the Europeans could probably handle. They probably couldn't manage much of the military support, but certainly the financial support the Europeans, with their large economies, could probably manage. But I think the president, along with his entire cabinet and the country in general, just wants to get this over and done with as quickly as possible, simply so that they can pivot their attention to much more pressing issues, which is, for the United States, is China, the rise of China and the Asia Pacific. They want to emphasize most of their efforts onto that arena.
Speaking of the input that European nations could play following whatever is agreed in the coming days, or even really as early as today, we know that Trump and Zelensky, they are expected to phone the European leaders after the meeting, according to officials who are familiar with the ongoing arrangements. And as we know, those European leaders are pushing for a peace agreement that has a lot of security guarantees for Ukraine, but they are in a weak bargaining position, aren't they? They are relying very much on the flag to our left, the stripes and the stars of the United States, because that's where the cash is, and bluntly, that's where the might is.
Yeah, only the United States can provide some sort of security guarantees. No other nation is able to do so. The Europeans, I think what the Americans and Zelensky will be looking for is financial support, not just for the military and ongoing rebuilding of their country, but essentially to rebuild their arms industry as well. Europe is in no position to provide military support. It's going to take Europe decades of, after extended negligence, to rebuild their military base, so they're in no position to do so. Only the US can do that. But I suspect that Trump will put immense pressure on the Europeans to provide their financial support, which is essentially what all they're able to do so.
OK, Dr. Azim Ibrahim, a journalist and author, thank you very much for your time this evening. Well, joining me now is the former British Army officer and the current defence analyst, Simon Diggins, for his reaction and also your view on what might take place now here, please, Mr. Diggins. This is a big moment, of course, in European security, but also for Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. We know that he's had a phone call between the two leaders that lasted well over an hour before this meeting today. What do you think the Ukrainian side will be thinking when they find out that the two leaders, Trump and Putin, had such a long call?
I think they'll be concerned, Charlie. Good evening to you. In the past, what's happened is there's been a sort of diplomatic level conversation that's run between senior officials, European leaders, President Zelensky, Secretary Marco Rubio, effectively the Foreign Secretary, and there appears to be kind of a reasonable agreement. Then what happens is President Trump gets involved, deals directly with President Putin. He comes away and he changes his mind because he's been listening to Putin. I think we've had this kind of flip-flop of what actually is the situation for a while. So he'll be very concerned and very interested to know precisely what has been agreed between President Putin and President Trump and what views came out of it.
Simon, sorry to interrupt quickly, but we are hearing now from the Kremlin foreign policy aide, Yuri Ushakov, on that call I was just referring to between the Presidents Putin and Trump. He said that they do not support a European-Ukrainian push for a temporary ceasefire ahead of a settlement. That is, that both Putin and Trump do not support it. And quoting from Mr. Yushakov, he said the main thing is that the presidents of Russia and the United States hold similar views, that the option of a temporary ceasefire under the pretext of preparing for a referendum only leads to a prolongation of the conflict and is fraught with renewed hostilities. Simon Diggins, that will be very troubling reading for the Ukrainian side as they approach this meeting, knowing that as they go in through that gold door ahead of us, that both Presidents Trump and Putin are singing from the same hymn sheet on at least one significant part of this deal.
No, absolutely, and that's precisely the point and the problem. What President Trump doesn't seem to recognise, though his officials recognise, it's some of the changes, some of the demands that President Putin has been making, whether it be about referendums, whether it be about constitutional changes to boundaries and everything, can only happen in the context of a referendum being placed with the Ukrainian people. And President Zelensky has made clear how long that would take, a minimum of some 60-odd days. Trying to do that in the middle of fighting a war as vicious as the Russians have created in Ukraine, is simply nonsensical. So I think President Zelensky is going to be on the back foot again with this particular negotiations, by the sound of it, because the Russians have not, just based on what you just told me now, have not changed their absolute maximalist demands for what they require from Ukraine, which I think is very disappointing all round.
Simon, we saw a message of support from Sir Keir Starmer as Mr. Zelensky was on his way to Florida, and also the Ukrainian leader met with Mark Carney of Canada yesterday. A lot of nations wrapping their sort of communications support around Volodymyr Zelensky, but the main sticking point perhaps is that they don't have much more else to give in terms of military hardware or capabilities that perhaps the Ukrainians don't have on the ground already. Is Mr. Zelensky basically in an impossible situation here, regardless of all the tweets and posts online and supportive phone calls? None of those will change the hard reality of the situation, which is that he's facing an unwinnable war with allies who can't do more to help him change the situation on the battlefield.
What he can't do, and there's no force on earth that are currently created, is let's take back the territory right back to where we were in 2014, or even probably in February 22. I would question whether the defeat on the battlefield is inevitable. I think what we have is a slow attritional battle. And in terms of slow attritional battles, clearly a side with powers with less resources is going to suffer. But let's not be too kind of negative about what Ukraine has achieved. I mean, since the Russians attacked in February 22, they have lost nearly 1 million men. Their economy is starting to hurt. And that will become even more clear as the year goes on. Now, because he's got his economy organised on a war footing basis, that may not necessarily directly affect Putin and Russia for a while. But nonetheless, they're starting to hurt, and trying to reorganise the economy to a slightly more natural situation will take a bit of time from there. President Zelensky's got the same problem. He's got a problem with manpower, with the resources. I mean, I think the real issue is not whether this particular round of negotiations works or not, or whether we go back to the slow attritional struggle which both sides are engaged in at the moment, which are hurting both sides. Ukraine probably more than that. Can the Europeans help? I think they can probably still do some more. You know, we've still not really seen our government, despite the rhetoric, and you're quite right to highlight the rhetoric-reality gap, actually step up to the plate in terms of not just defending Ukraine, but also defending our own country. And many other European countries are in exactly the same position. Not so Poland, not so the Baltics, not so places like Finland, but a lot of the Western European countries are still, as you say, big on the rhetoric, big on the noise of support, big on the tweets, not very big on putting the tanks, the missiles and the guns and the people in the right place.
Now, Simon, we're also hearing earlier today Sergei Lavrov, who's Russia's foreign minister. He said that any European troops on the ground in Ukraine would be legitimate targets. More of that fighting talk we've heard from the Russian side throughout this conflict about any sort of coalition of the willing, as it's been branded, any presence of non-Ukrainian troops there to maintain the peace. They've rejected a ceasefire. They've said that they would target any European troops on the ground in Ukraine. There's not a lot of space to manoeuvre for European nations and other elements within NATO, should they wish to push back on the agreement between Trump and Putin and say, actually, we will try and enforce a ceasefire?
No, it's a very narrow gap, and you're quite right to highlight the sort of aggressive talk, which is a sort of standard Russian aggressive talk and maximalist demands on, and they've done it before. Right at the very beginning of the campaign, they threatened to use nuclear weapons. I mean, the language that the Russian has is language of force, the language of threats. They have very little other language, which is one of the problems we have when we're dealing with them diplomatically. Sure, there'll be a risk involved, but the risk is, do we actually intervene now? Do we try and support the Ukrainians now in terms of the ceasefire, or if we can get a ceasefire, or do we wait for the Russians to pause, regroup, and go for their next bite wherever they chose to do. I think it's a very stark choice that we face, and it's a very ugly choice that we face. But I think that's kind of where we are. It's not it's not jam today or jam tomorrow. It's kind of war today or war tomorrow. And I think somewhere along the line, we just need to recognise the situation we're in.
Simon, just very quickly, I've just been looking. I think I've seen you online wearing a Royal Regiment of Fusiliers beret with the hackle. So I believe you were an infantier when you retired from the British Army. The military has changed a lot, and warfare has changed a lot since this conflict started in 2022. As an infantier, when you look at the sort of warfare that we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment, when you hear European and Western leaders talking about getting involved with that conflict, how prepared do you think we are? You also served in Afghanistan, and you were a military attaché in our embassy in Kabul. We're used to a very different sort of warfare, aren't we, as a nation, and indeed as a continent. It's only really the Ukrainians who've got that proper experience. If our militaries are asked to step up and play a role here, are you concerned about the preparedness of those forces?
I think I am. I mean, thank you for recognising my regiment, the Royal Fusiliers. Very proud member of it as well. I think we are. I think we're learning as we go along. We're learning to be adaptable, to be flexible. I think we're also beginning to recognise the scale of requirement in terms of drone warfare that has undoubtedly changed the way people are viewing it. But it's also been seen in other countries. So we've seen, for example, the Danes and the Finns are now building factories that can turn out drones on the same sort of scale that the Ukrainians are trying to do, and that we are supporting that and will be buying into that from there. So I think there is a recognition that the situation is changing. But what these things don't do necessarily is change some of the overall dynamic. It's a different way of conducting bits of the warfare, but there'll be other areas where you actually need to continue to hold and to take ground, and for that the more conventional elements of land warfare will be required. And the same thing really applies across other domains, across the air, the use of drones in the air, and we've also seen the use of unattended vehicles in the sea as well. So we're seeing this now on a scale we haven't seen before, and indubitedly that drones, electronic warfare, cyber, information operations, they've all existed in the past. The scale of them, I think, has been new in this campaign. But I'm actually very confident that our defence leaders are looking very hard at what the programmes have got and working out what they need to do. The difficulty they've got, and you highlighted it earlier on, or Dr. Azim did, we've had decades of negligence as far as our defence is concerned. And so our problem is going to be not just being prepared to fight a war within 5 years, which has been basically threatened for that, but also prepare for future conflicts, in which case we need a more structured review and a better balance of our forces. So there is, that's the challenge we've actually got. We've been warned by very credible people, intelligence officers in places like Poland, Finland, Estonia, the Baltics, places like that, saying that Putin is prepared to engage and fight NATO by 2027, certainly within five years. And yet our sort of jam tomorrow defence policy suggests we might get to 3.5% of our defence by 2035. Well, there's just a huge gap there, and both can't be right. I think I know who should be right. And on the basis of, go for the worst case, which is potentially a war within the next 5 years, we should have a completely different approach to our defence and to our defence structure. We are in a weak place. It's absolutely true to say that, but I don't think we're naive about the problem. What we are naive about is our political classes and their willingness to spend money on solving the problems.
OK, Simon Diggins, former British Army officer and defence analyst, thank you very much for your time this evening. Well, in the studio, I've got the political commentator Andy Williams, who joins me now, awaiting the arrival of Volodymyr Zelenskyy to Mr. President Trump's personal home in Florida. Andy, that latest update we've got, hearing from a foreign policy aide in Russia, in the Kremlin, about President Trump and President Putin being on the same page about there not needing to be a ceasefire at the moment. Very troubling reading for the Ukrainians.
Yeah, I mean, very significant. The last time Zelenskyy visited the US, Putin basically phoned Trump the day beforehand, and they had a conversation that totally blew that summit off course. And I wouldn't be surprised, I'm afraid, if the same things happened again. Putin knows exactly what he's doing. He's a very, very skilled operator. And the truth is, I suspect I think Trump sympathises with Putin in a way that he doesn't with Zelenskyy. I mean, on a personal level, he said he admires the way that Putin does business, and I think that's very, very, very concerning. I think a ceasefire is absolutely what's needed, because if you look at the devastation and the havoc that's been wrought in Kyiv and in other Ukrainian cities over the last few days, it's horrendous to watch. Something like 75,000 Ukrainians have now died during the course of this conflict, and we really need to push the pause button. But Trump seems to have been persuaded yet again that that's not something that should happen.
OK. Bit of movement going on there with someone's lens very helpfully in the way of our camera there down in Florida. But so we're still awaiting the arrival, but we have seen a bit of flurry of activity there. And Andy Williams, when we think about previous meetings and a more recent meeting, that White House gathering in August, they did find some common ground on security guarantees, which of course has been a central part of the Ukrainian diplomatic attempts since then as well. They included an agreement on $90 billion of arms between the countries. That was a major update as well. But the problem for the Ukrainians, of course, is $90 billion. It's a lot of money, but it's not enough.
No, and the truth is that, you know, this is not a war that Ukraine can win. That is, unfortunately, the elephant in the room here. They don't have the people, they don't have the financial resources, and they might not have, as we were saying earlier, the patience of their allies who have been steadfast up until now in supporting them, you know, not just the United States, but Europe as well. It is worth saying that actually Europe has collectively put more money in than the United States, although the US obviously have thrown significant resources at this problem.
So we know that Presidents Trump and Zelensky, they're going to speak to European leaders after the meeting. According to that Kremlin foreign policy aide, Yuri Yushakov, Trump and Putin will also hold another call tonight after the Trump-Zelensky meeting takes place later today. So these engagements between the various leaders, it's going to rumble on. I wonder, as you said, Andy, about sort of Putin calling Trump before the last meeting. I wonder if he's thinking he can play the same trick, but a little bit closer this time. I say trick, it's good diplomatic strategy on his behalf to push forward his perspective with a world leader he knows respects and appreciates him. We certainly see that through his post on his social media platform, Truth Social, earlier this evening. Still more movement going on there. World leaders yet to arrive. But Andy Williams, it could be the case that Putin's done it again, right? That he's got those ideas into Donald Trump's mind.
Yes.
They're in a position of agreement, according to a Kremlin aide. We've not heard from the US side. I wonder if he's basically organised a call after that meeting to say, did you do what we said we would?
I think that's absolutely what's happened. And, the thing about Trump is his temperament is... One of the ironies of Trump is people always say he's very unpredictable. He's actually very predictable. We know exactly how he behaves, how he operates. And one of the things about Trump, if you look at his entire time in office, is he's very persuaded by the last person he spoke to. The last conversation he had.
Here we go. Here's the US President, Donald Trump, has just left the door there and waiting for the arrival of Volodymyr Zelensky. Not making remarks to reporters just yet, but here we go. Let's listen in.
Got to make a deal. Got to get it done. Too many people dying, and I think both presidents want to make a deal. We believe that. I'm going to brief you on that.
We need Putin against you.
Depends. I do believe that we have the makings of a deal that's good for Ukraine, good for everybody. It's very important. There's nothing more important. We settled 8 wars, and this was the most difficult one. I thought it would be deadlines. You know what my deadline is? Getting the war ended. We don't have deadlines. You agree with that? I think they're going to find security agreement today. Well, it depends what the security agreement says. What a dumb question. Nobody even knows what the security agreement is going to say. But there will be a security agreement. It'll be a strong agreement. And the European nations are very much involved in that. They'll be very much involved in protection, etc. But the European nations have been really great. They're very much in line with this meeting and with getting a deal done. They're terrific people. I think you can say that. There's nobody there. They all want to get it done, and they've been very supportive, I think.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Thank you for this meeting. Thank you for your invitation. Yes, really, I agree with the President. Our teams, they do what they can. And I think that during last month, they moved forward with negotiations and Americans. And thank you very much for your Steve and Jared. And they worked very well, I think. And they worked on different documents. I hope that all these documents can bring this as quick as possible. So, and I agree with the President that really you're good. Yes, and the President is in contact with them, and maybe we'll make contact with them.
We can go
today.
What made you want to come in person to meet the President today?
Sorry?
What made you want to come here to Mar-a-Lago to meet the President today?
What? Yeah. What?
Why?
So we spoke about our teams. They work on 20 points plan. Then they worked on prosperity and security document. And 20 points plan is very important. We have to discuss and sequencing plan. Very important. Our teams talked about strategy, how to make step by step, and to bring this closer. And we will discuss this strategy. We will speak about 20 points plan. There are in 20 points plan, 90% by the way was done by our two teams. I think they've made a great job, great work, and yes, we will discuss these points also.
And there are great economic benefits for Ukraine also, because there's a lot of rebuilding to do. There's a lot of wealth to be had, and they have great wealth. Potentially, they have great wealth. They want to get started, but there's a great economic benefit for Ukraine in what we're talking about.
President Trump, some are saying that the recent attacks in the past couple of days that Russia's staged against Ukraine shows that President Putin isn't serious about things. What is your reaction to that?
No, he's very serious. I think I can say that I believe Ukraine has made some very strong attacks also. And I don't say that negatively. I think you probably have to. I don't say that negatively. But I think, and he doesn't tell me that, but there have been some explosions in various parts of Russia. And it looks to me like, I don't know, I don't think it came from the Congo. I don't think it came from the United States of America. It possibly came from Ukraine, but I haven't asked that question. Maybe I won't bother asking. They're fighting a war, and we'll see what happens. But I believe it's a war that we have two willing parties, we have two willing countries that want to see it end. The people of Ukraine want it to end, and the people of Russia want it to end, and the two leaders want it to end.
Mr. President, on the economic benefits for Ukraine, Europe is holding some billions in frozen Russian assets. Do you believe that should go to Ukraine to help rebuild, or go back to Russia?
None of that's been determined, but it'll go. It's going to go very quickly. I think we're in final stages of talking, and we're going to see. Otherwise, it's going to go on for a long time. It'll either end, or it's going to go on for a long time, and millions of additional people are going to be killed. Millions.
So would you say,
and nobody wants that.
Are you still frustrated with this process?
What?
Would you say you're still frustrated?
When you say that you think it will either end or will go on for a long time, and you say you don't have a deadline, so what are you expecting it to be?
I just think we can do. I think we can move very rapidly. I really feel that. We've spoken. I know you had dinner with Steve. Steve Witkoff and Jared have done a fantastic job. And everybody has. Marco has been incredible. The whole group has been, our group has been incredible. And Ukraine appreciates it, and Russia appreciates it. They both want to see it end, and we're going to get it ended. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you, I think, at the end, but I do think we'll call Europe also. We're going to speak to the European leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, US President Donald Trump welcoming Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy into his personal home in Mar-a-Lago in Florida after giving remarks to reporters outside the front door there, where he made several curious statements, very strong statements about this upcoming agreement. He said that both Ukrainian and Russian presidents want to make a deal. He said that they could meet again soon. He's going to have a great meeting today, and he confirmed that he would be calling with Vladimir Putin later again today. He said he doesn't have a deadline for this deal and that there will be a security agreement. He was asked by a reporter towards the end if he thought that President Putin was serious about peace, referring to those recent drone and missile strikes on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. When responding to that, US President Donald Trump, he said, I do think that Putin is serious about peace. And he also made comparisons with explosions in Russia. In recent days, we have seen what appeared to be targeted assassinations of Russian military intelligence officials, and commenting on what we understand to be those strikes, Trump said, I don't think it came from the Congo. I don't think it came from the USA. And Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that he thought the deal was 90% done. But I wonder what his reaction will be to what appeared to be an equivocation between Russian strikes on civilian infrastructure by drone and missile attacks versus those assassinations, what appear to be targeted strikes with limited car explosions on military intelligence officials, sort of what might be termed by as more legitimate targets by international observers. Well, we're joined now by the defence writer and analyst Robert Fox. Robert, thank you very much for joining us again here on GB News. First, your reaction to those comments from President Trump talking about Vladimir Putin being 100% serious about peace and dismissing concerns raised after those recent missile and drone strikes on the Ukrainian capital.
Well, he made it absolutely clear, did he not, that Putin will have the last word on this. He's been talking to Putin before these talks took place. There have been serious negotiations between the home team for Trump, which is Kushner, Vitkov, and one or two others, with Dmitriev and Uchikov, and the home team for Putin himself. But Putin will have the veto on this, and if Putin by tonight, by the time you close down tonight, will either have said yes or no. I don't think he'll equivocate, and they will know whether they've got a negotiation going forward. It still may be inconclusive, but I thought one of the most ominous remarks that Trump made, we've got to end it now. Otherwise, it's going to go on for a very, very long time. Putin himself, around the inner circle, there have been various ominous remarks in the last day or two suggesting that they're going to go maximalist. They're going to go to the terms that were mentioned in 2021, before the invasion, immediately after the invasion in 2022. And there's no doubt that those terms of really making, well, neutering, really, Ukraine and joining it back into the Russian sphere of influence, those were the terms that were made pretty clear when they met at that strange summit in Alaska on August the 15th of this year.
Robert Fox, we heard Donald Trump there saying that millions will die if this continues, very much echoing those ominous comments coming out of the Kremlin and beyond. But he did strike a more upbeat tone when he started speaking to reporters, saying that both presidents want peace. He's confident it can be achieved. What did you make of the limited engagement we had there from the Ukrainian president? Volodymyr Zelenskyy did seem perhaps a little bit more subdued than he has been in the past when meeting with Donald Trump.
He looked exhausted, and I think he must realise that the 20-point plan that he has come up with, which has already got the thumbs down from the inner court, the inner circle, that's what you have to watch with Putin, is saying that the 20-point plan is really not sufficient. And this time it is Ryabkov, the deputy foreign minister, that has stated this just a few days ago, as well as Mr. Ushikov, who is the security and foreign affairs consigliere to Vladimir Putin himself. I think that Vladimir Zelensky realizes, as do most of the more informed commentators, should I put it, realize that this one probably isn't going to go anywhere, at least not in the short term.
And Robert Fox, we also heard from Donald Trump there saying that there will be a strong security agreement for Ukraine and that, quote, European nations are very much involved. I feel that European nations have been really great and they're very much in line with this meeting and with getting a deal done. They are all terrific people and we expect they'll be having a phone call with those European leaders and Mr. Zelensky after this meeting concludes. Some movement then on a potential role for the European militaries to play in Ukraine on that security agreement. How do you expect that might play out in reality?
Well, I think that's a wonderful bit of it. It's almost a distraction procedure because Russia will not allow any boots on the ground, even if it's sort of semi-blue helmets or as monitors from any outside NATO nation. And also that it's been part of the whole pitch of Putin since he rose to power, really came to power 25 years ago now, that really Russia has been done down by the unexpected, unwarranted and unpromised roll eastward of NATO, and he will not want to hear NATO nations being involved at all. And by the way, I think Donald Trump really knows that.
Yes, I think he might know that too. But we've got a meeting here at Mar-a-Lago. Robert Fox will listen in now.
Would you like something to eat at this time? Yes or no? You can speak.
Yes, sir.
Yes? Okay. Margot,
Yes, sir.
take them outside. Tell the chef, serve them a little lunch, okay?
Thank you, press.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
That should guarantee good stories, but it won't.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
They'll only get worse. Alex should go out of their way to make them worse. He gave us a hamburger. We have to make them better.
Alex, thanks. Press.
Okay?
Thank you, press. Thank you,
You
press.
lead the way. Go outside on the porch. Because we have the house closed today. Hey, Margot.
And there we had President Trump providing some remarks in Mar-a-Lago. Are we still joined by defence writer Robert Fox? Go back to Robert Fox. You were just speaking there about what this security guarantee could mean. We've seen now Donald Trump sitting down inside. Earlier we heard from the Russian side saying that both Trump and Putin share the same mindset when it comes to this ceasefire plan. So for Trump to come out and start talking about a security guarantee with European leaders being very much involved, it appears that the Russian side are sort of pouring scorn on that straight away.
Even before they got out of the hangar or the aircraft shed, really did it. Because one of the things that if NATO is involved, and which is inescapable for Trump, and I think, again, he must know this now, it means that America has to be involved. It has to say yay or nay. It will have a veto on the deployment and the planning and the execution of alliance formations. I put it like that because NATO is the premier planning organization for European nations when they cooperate together. Yes, there is a very low-level peacekeeping and monitoring operation run by two other organizations like the European Union. The European Union, we should be aware, that has great pretensions to managing defense and security in Europe, but it is nowhere near ready to do that, and it is nowhere near capable of being a competitor of NATO, to the extent that when European military operations are planned, very often they have to borrow NATO planning capabilities, facilities, particularly at their great planning centre at Mons in Belgium. So just to explain that detail is that this choreography is now looking very, very odd indeed. And I think that this is a game, a diplomatic game, whereby that both America and to an extent Putin's Russia are already looking for the get-out clauses.
are in their final stages. Otherwise, he said it's going to go on for a very long time. And Robert Fox, what you're referring to there, it feels as though it's a reference to essentially European impotence in this situation. We had so much talk earlier this year about the coalition of the willing, the preparedness of European militaries to stand up to what they would have termed privately perhaps as the negligence of the United States towards Ukraine. But perhaps that exhausted face we're seeing of Volodymyr Zelenskyy on our screens right now, it's a resignation, it's an acceptance that those capabilities won't be coming, those boots on the ground, it's politically and militarily and strategically impossible for them to go there. When Trump says that them being able to move very rapidly, he says Ukraine appreciates it and Russia appreciates it. Do you think that's right?
I think you're quite right. I think it's the timetable which is really extraordinarily tight now. I think you're also right, and I'd like to put a very unseasonable curmudgeonly remark on it. You're right to flag up the phrase coalition of the willing. I know people in certain newsrooms across this capital who would like to ban that expression from being used. It's a favourite phrase for obvious reasons from Whitehall, because it's, we can go there, do a lot of talking and not having to do very much. What the European allies realise, as you suggest, they've got to make up the gap very, very quickly to defend Ukraine, primarily to defend Ukraine's cities and ports as much as helping Ukraine on the battlefield. They can help Ukraine on the battlefield, and there the story is very murky. Ukraine is bleeding very badly, but it is not losing badly enough, and Russia is not winning well enough. The Russian losses are colossal. The capacity of both sides to innovate is very strong, but it's particularly striking, as of the last 2 or 3 weeks, again, of Ukraine, of how they've seen this crazy battlefield, something old, something very, very new about it, and how they can bodge and match and put things together. And you get strange new phenomena, which the Russians haven't planned for and have to operate all over again. One of the areas I would just instance for that is robotics. Automated vehicles on the ground crashing into Russian sites, Russian troops blowing up a lot of them, but enough getting through. And quite primitive vehicles are being converted, loaded with enormous numbers of weaponry and being pushed into places. That's why we heard 3-4 weeks ago that Russia had all but taken Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, crucial hubs on the front line at the moment, and yet Ukrainian forces, manned and unmanned, have managed to bash into both places now. It's looking very, very strange indeed. Europe has got to up the game in delivering missiles, particularly air defense missiles, and helping the frontline battlefield. But can I just mention another thing which was very strange, which we haven't mentioned, in that doorstep press appearance, press opportunity that both leaders gave, now talking quite openly about the attacks inside Russia. Now, I want to pick you up slightly there. It's not just assassinations. Yes, there have been a few of the assassinations, and we had the assassination of the general in charge of training just 2 days ago. It's actually what's happening on infrastructure key sites. They're knocking out 1, 2, or 3 per night at the moment, and it's beginning to have a real effect. The other thing about that is not just the long-range missiles like the new one that they got going, the Flamingo. The Flamingos are getting through. An awful lot of them are being knocked down. But it's pretty clear there are insurgent guerrilla groups, about 8 of them, working across Russia. They're beginning to have an effect. And this is the first sign, I think, that we've had, however obliquely, the slightest hint that America knows that this is going on.
Yes, that they're aware that there is that Ukrainian sort of infiltration inside Russia, being able to carry out those...
Atash can be mentioned because it has its own website now.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Robert Fox, you're speaking about how Ukraine isn't losing this war badly enough for it to fold, and for this sense of resilience continuing. Perhaps that's playing into that greater sense of danger at the same time, because we have had that ominous discussion, as we were seeing earlier ago, seeing pictures from those briefs to reporters on the steps of the Mar-a-Lago residence in the last half hour or so, when Donald Trump said that millions would die if this continued. Perhaps with the innovation we've seen from the Ukrainian side, with their new and rather unique military capabilities that they're developing through robotics, through drones as well, that might push Vladimir Putin to a more extreme position if this peace deal isn't signed. It's almost like a sense that the Ukrainians are doing too well to get a better deal over the line with less of a threat coming from the Russian side.
I'd rather like to expand that. I think you're absolutely right. Ukraine is going to be a big, big problem for years to come, because it is easily the greatest arms, take-out nuclear weapons of the Western European nations now, if you put it in the Western orbit. It's an enormous arms dump. It's an enormous place of technical, tactical innovation, moving its new experiments, because it has to, by the day, by the hour at time, in a way that no Western European armed force can do. And I agree with you, your point about the desperation of Putin. Putin can't pull back. He can't say, oh, it's all a mistake, let's have an armistice, let's regroup now. He is on a war trajectory. Now, where does that take him? And it's very, very interesting that the new head of the Royal Navy has got great prominence in the media over the last 2 or 3 days. That's Lieutenant General Gwyn Jenkins, because he has been warning the activity, for instance, of Russian submarines, as well as surveillance ships, surface ships, as well as the cyber attacks, as well as the drones across the Baltic, is going up and up. We can expect more. He will try to disrupt. He will try to, Putin, deflect Europe right across the piece, and he'll make very little differentiation between whether you're an EU ally, whether you're Britain, and it's a thing that America, in the end, and Trump knows this, I think, cannot afford to ignore.
OK, defence writer Robert Fox, I think you're right to point out the posturing and the increased prominence of the First Sea Lord. Interesting that his new naval assistant has just arrived from the Times newspaper, and that newspaper has today got a newly declassified image of a Russian submarine following a spy ship into British waters. So I expect,
isn't that a strange thing?
Isn't it very strange indeed? But perhaps
what a coincidence.
But perhaps, Robert, we might see more newly declassified images and more information about Russian military efforts and the Royal Navy's attempts to counter it. Robert Fox, thank you very much for your time this evening. And we've got Free Speech Nation coming up shortly, but first we can speak with Andy Williams. And Andy, the Polish President Donald Tusk has issued a very brief post on X, simply saying good luck to Zelenskyy as he heads into this meeting with Donald Trump. Andy Williams, a lot of European leaders will be sharing that sense.
Sorry, Charlie, could you just repeat that?
They'll be wishing good luck to Volodymyr Zelenskyy as he heads into this meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of the European leaders are going to be desperate for, for the two men to walk out of this meeting with a positive outcome, with progress having been made. And I think crucially, without Vladimir Putin leaving with the upper hand. So as we were saying earlier, they've already spoken today. It looks like there's going to be a follow-up phone call between Putin and Trump. And I just hope, as somebody who has watched on in horror over the last few years as this conflict has unfolded, that Volodymyr Zelenskyy can walk away with a good outcome today, because for the good of the world, we should all be backing him.
Andy Williams, thank you very much for your company this evening. And as President Donald Trump welcomed Volodymyr Zelenskyy to his Mar-a-Lago residence this evening, he said that both leaders are serious about peace. I think they both are, he told reporters. He says that he has the makings of a deal, and Volodymyr Zelenskyy echoed that, saying it's 90% of the way there. After that meeting concludes, we will expect both Trump and Zelenskyy to speak with European leaders, but also Trump will be speaking with Vladimir Putin, the man who has influenced so much on this encounter. Thank you so much for your company this evening. Coming up next on GB News, it's Free Speech Nation with Steve and Alan. Stay with us.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. High pressure holding on over the next 24 hours or so. There will be a lot of cloud around, but I'm hopeful sunnier skies are expected by Tuesday. In the meantime, high pressure sat to the northwest of the UK, drawing in a lot of cloud from the north and east. So some of us have seen a few brighter breaks today, and as we head through the evening and overnight, it still remains rather cloudy. The cloud thick enough for some light rain and drizzle in places. The clearest skies across parts of Scotland, temperatures here down to -6 or -7 in the countryside. Some thick fog patches developing through the central belt could lead to some tricky travel conditions first thing. Elsewhere, temperatures generally hovering just above freezing, but any clear spells of patchy frost is possible. A weak weather front across northern Scotland, giving some outbreaks of light rain first thing on Monday morning, but elsewhere, sunny start across Scotland. No fog patches through the central belt could lead to some tricky travelling conditions. Elsewhere, generally quite cloudy for Northern Ireland, much of England and Wales, but the cloud will be broken in places to allow some sunnier breaks, but there'll also be some frost patches around and maybe some fog too. And then as we go through the day, we'll see this weak weather front just introducing the risk of a few showers down eastern parts of Scotland, eventually eastern coasts of England. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud, but again, western areas the cloud could break at times to allow some sunny spells. Quite breezy along the east coast, keeping temperatures here 6 or 7 Celsius generally for most, perhaps up to around 7 or 8 around the coasts, and where the fog lingers, it could stay quite cold through the central belt. On Tuesday, I'm hopeful there'll be more in the way of sunny spells. Many places dry, though again, still the risk of some coastal showers across the UK, and still rather chilly. It stays dry and settled into New Year's Eve, but then New Year's Day onwards, it's likely to turn colder and a bit more wintry.
Expect warm spells with the odd rude interruption. Boxed Boilers sponsors the weather on GB News.
This is your chance to become our biggest cash prize winner to date. £85,000 in totally tax-free cash could be making its way from our bank account to yours. It would be like having over £7,000 per month extra to play with, each month for a whole year. That could be you, safe in the knowledge that 2026 is on us. For another chance to win £85,000 cash, text cash to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB18 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1